I don't think when you're diagnosed with cancer, it's the time to have a statistics lesson, right? I don't think we're getting informed consent from people if you just shout numbers at them, right? I don't think that works either. But what I think that you could do is you could have somebody who turns it round the other way, right? So who sits down with you and says to you, okay, what is important to you in your life? What are the things that you value? So it's the other way around, right? It's not you're taking a number and trying to attach a feeling to it. It's the opposite. You're taking a feeling and trying to attach a number to it.
Hannah, it is excellent to be here in LinkedIn, London with you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me. Delight to be here.
So starting with a question that kind of surprised me when it was suggested to me. Apparently you've said that if you weren't going to be a mathematician, you'd be a hairdresser. Right. So one, why? Don't see the relationship. And two, if you were a hairdresser, how would math play into hairdressing?
Okay, right. So the sad thing is, I remember saying this, and it is absolutely true as well. Like when I was 16, it was what I wanted to do, and my mum was like, "Okay, look, just once you finish your GCSEs, just do your A levels, right? Just pick maths, maths, physics, and chemistry. Just do those, and then we'll see where we are." And then I finished my A levels, and she was like, "Okay, just go and do a quick degree in maths and theoretical physics. Just come on, just go and do a quick degree." And it sort of went on and on and on. And then eventually the hairdressing has fallen by the wayside. But it was like a genuine ambition of mine. And the thing is that I still really, I can still like tap into that feeling of what I wanted, because I think that there is something, first of all, quite interesting about like kind of constructing a three-dimensional shape by like, you're on a sphere. There's sort of some interesting geometrical properties there. But also, I think what it is it's about doing something and then immediately seeing the value in it. I think there's something quite satisfying about that idea. And I get the same kind of buzz, I suppose, from doing Instagram videos or YouTube videos. You do something and then you immediately see like the effects of it. It's not like in the academic world. I mean, things are slow burn, right? Slow burn. So yeah, I think that was what it was about.
I was just going to say, it's like when you go to the gym and you have a personal trainer and you want them to be fit, you have great hair.
Thank you so much.
You know what I mean? It's like not a
Thank you so
bad backup profession is all I'm saying.
Thank you so much. Yes.
But you did end up, you call yourself an accidental broadcaster,
Yeah.
which I love.
Yeah.
And so are there things that you can't wait to focus on? Like what's percolating in your head right now? What is like the most curiosities going on that you're excited to touch on and focus on?
I've been trying to get some stuff about artificial intelligence done properly out there for so long. And it's actually, I mean, it's been really difficult to persuade people that this is something that's worth like time and attention that can be told in an entertaining way. And I think that this switch has just happened in the last 18 months or so, where people are like, okay, no, we will really like address this. So I'm really looking forward to doing some of that. I don't know, I'm like, at the moment, I'm going through a bit of a phase. I've just been reading some Gödel, about sort of the limits of what we can possibly know. And then another amazing book about von Neumann and about, like simulated life forms and things. So I'm really like, I'm in this quite philosophical mood at the moment where I'm thinking a lot about what knowledge means and the edges of knowledge and how we can deal with the fact that there are things that we will never know.
I think that most people don't see how math is so relevant to their lives. One of the things I think is really excellent about your work is to say, how do I make it tangible, practical? What are the things that when you begin to think about how you live a better life, math is a good way of doing that. When someone starts from like I don't understand math or I'm a little alienated, what are the first things that you kind of try to light up their world and their universe? Because like, for example, on the AI point that you were making, part of what I was doing in the super agency is to try to move people from AI fearful, skeptical, worried to AI curious. And I see a similar arc, which is you're trying to make people math curious.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are kind of really traumatized, genuinely traumatized by the math that they encounter in schools. And I think it really divides people, right? You end up with some people like us, I imagine, being really drawn to the subject. And I think a lot of people really turned away. And you're never going to switch that, right? You're never going to suddenly make these people like reading maths textbooks, for fun. So I think it's about acknowledging where people are and using that as your just as a baseline, right? You just have to, I think, accept that. But then I think it's about really doing it by stealth. So that's maybe
It's the vitamin in the Twinkie.
it's the exactly. It's the vitamin in the Twinkie, exactly right. Because I think that when you have had the luxury of really seeing the world through a mathematical lens, I think that you fully understand that there is almost everything can be viewed through that perspective. I think that it has incredible insights that it can offer you on literally anything. And I think that the sort of the explosion in sort of productivity and everything that the world has seen in the last 15 years has been based on that, right? It's like the era of big data was the kind of mathification of industry. And I think that when you understand that, then I think that you can start elsewhere, right? You can pick basically any topic you like and then show the insights. And then, I mean, actually, I often make programs where I never even say the word maths, like I never even mention it. But it's just about providing these kind of curious, like counterintuitive, surprising ways to turn something that people feel like they already know, turn it on its head and show it to them in a completely different way.
I mean, my friends are going to make so much fun of me about this episode if possible because constantly I'm talking about data and I'm like, oh, you think that? Well, actually, it's 40%. Like I'm the most obnoxious. And then my husband will be like, well, that's not true. Art, let's look, like I just think math is such a way to explain the world. And to your point, it feels like, again, I actually don't know if this is, I think it's very different by country. At least in the US, people are math people and not math people. And that's so ingrained in our head. There's no growth mindset. It's just, well, I'm bad at math. I can't understand it. And you actually had a colleague say to you, people are scared of mathematicians. Let's keep it that way.
Yeah.
Like, why do you think people feel that way? And like, how can we not leave math to the pros?
Oh my gosh. I think that people who are like, let's keep it that way, right? I think they were the people who were bullied in school, I think,
so this is deep personal trauma that we're getting this from.
I think so.
And I bet you math can help with therapy too.
Almost certainly. No, I mean, I think that you can weaponize it, actually. I think that when you have knowledge and when you have, I think it gives you power, basically.
Right.
I mean, in short, I think if you are able to create mathematical models that can impact the way that things are run, and you understand them, I think actually it's very easy to just like draw a wall around you and be like, sorry, you're not, you can't come in. But the thing is, at the same time, I also think that actually, we are quite literally designing our collective future, as we speak. I mean, I guess we always have been in history, but particularly now.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that everybody deserves to have a say in that, and I don't think that people should be excluded from it. I'm not saying for a second that everyone's going to be mathematicians. Of course they're not. But I think what I would like to just move the dial a little bit on is that is people understanding that there is this connection between a subject that they think is like numbers and textbooks and whatever, and actually this really living, breathing language that is allowing us to effect change out in the real world. I think I'd like people to just understand that those things are, this is also maths, right? This is also maths. And be invited in on the conversation. Yeah. And I don't think that you necessarily need to know like all of the notation and the high level calculus or whatever it might be in order to be involved in these conversations. But when it comes to, I know you've spoken a lot about ethics and doing things safely. I think those kind of conversations, you should be drawing people into those.
In the AI revolution, which I've referred to as the cognitive industrial revolution, what are the ways that people should think about engaging with AI that's mathematically informed?
So I think a lot of it is about critical thought. I think that historically computers have been kind of deterministic machines, right? It's like, you put the same sum into a calculator twice, you get the same answer out. And I think that actually we are moving away from that and more towards this much more sort of stochastic, like, probabilistic space. And I think that people haven't yet adjusted their mindset to what that actually means. And I think you see this with, hallucinations from large language models, of course. But I think that you also really see it in the ways that people are applying, mathematical models or artificial intelligence models to determine particular outcomes, right? So, for example, let's say that I somehow or other came up with an amazing new algorithm that could find your perfect partner in the entire world, right? But it did it with an 85% accuracy, right? I think that people are not very good at understanding what that means. I mean, it's just a silly example, right? But understanding what that means and what the wider implications are of that. And there are countless examples of that nature. I mean, more and more and more and more, where these things fall short of perfection and will always fall short of perfection, which is fine.
Yes.
But where that gap between sort of perfect and what you end up with, there can be sort of all kinds of potential problems that arise.
By the way, you're highlighting a particular thing. Aria's heard this from me before. That is my particular, if I had a mathematical wish for humanity, it would be understanding that everything is in probabilities, that it's almost never 0% and almost never 100%. And how you're configuring your navigation path depends on the intersection's probabilities. And yet people tend to collapse it into 100 or 0, which frequently, like if you have an 85%, you skate through it 85% of the time, fine. But then you're ambushed by the 15 when you shouldn't be. Yeah.
I mean, I think actually, I tend to think of almost everything as sort of spectrum. So I completely agree with you about between 0 and 100. But I also think about when you're having arguments with people, it's like right and wrong also exists along this spectrum. And I think that, the big kind of like societal debates that we've had where people feel so completely polarized, it's like, there's a mathematical trick where you deliberately sort of push something to an extreme. So you think of, okay, what would the case be if this particular variable went to infinity, or what would it be if this was 0? And you kind of use that to give you information. And I think that the Jesuits have a similar philosophy, right? So when there's an argument about something, you sort of imagine an extreme version of the same problem to help you understand it a little bit better. But I think that thing of like of not seeing the world in black and white. It's not 100% or 0. It's not yes or no. It's not true or false. Everything exists along a spectrum. I think that's a really helpful way to see the world.
Well, I mean, that to me, besides like weeping alongside of you in your documentary about cancer, that actually was the most illuminating moment. I mean, I was talking about it with Reed this morning. So often with health and medicine, I mean, especially as women, it's like you get these things. It's like, well, if you do that, you're 10 times more likely to get cancer. And it's like, well, the chance before was 0.001, and now it's like your mind can't comprehend.
Absolutely.
And especially for people who don't sort of have a facility with math. And so, in that documentary, you were talking about, if 100 women were diagnosed and 80 of them would have been okay without going through chemotherapy. And what are the odds? Like, what was the response that you got to that? How do you think about that? Like, to me, especially with something so important as your life, the math becomes very important, but then also not important because you say, of course, I'm going to do this. Like, how did you think about that?
Yeah, so there was one woman in the documentary in particular, this woman, Anne. And I mean, that's a conversation that will stay with me forever, right? So she's for people who haven't seen it, she was in her late 60s and she'd just been diagnosed with breast cancer. And she'd had the lump removed, but the doctor was working out what future treatment she should be given. And they said exactly as you said, right? So they said, if we don't touch you again, you have an 84% chance of living another 10 years. But if we give you everything we've got, so chemotherapy, radiotherapy, like hormone therapy, everything, we can increase it to 88. And it's like that. I mean, that is such a, like, I thought that was a really difficult decision, right? Do you go through it? But I spoke to her outside and I was like, I mean, what are you going to do? And she was like, oh, I have to have the chemotherapy because otherwise I'll die. It was like, I was absolutely astonished that the numbers were not getting through, right? The numbers were not communicating the message. And then I really thought about it. I went back through to the doctor and was like, she did not understand. Like, she just thinks you go to the doctor, they tell you the treatment, you take the treatment, the thing goes away, right? It's like exactly as you said, 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%. And the doctor was like, I think if, I think if she did understand, she probably wouldn't go through the treatment. And if that happens over and over and over again, more people will die, which is also completely true. And so I think I really, I think what that started in me and has continued. So the book I'm writing at the moment is about doubt and uncertainty. Is that I'm not sure I even know what those numbers mean. I'm not sure I understand the difference between 88% and 84%. Like, is the human brain really capable of that? I don't think it is. And so then it's like, well, now you've got these numbers that are applicable and very useful at the population level, and are kind of meaningless when it comes down to you as an individual. Then it's like, well, what does probability actually mean? And I think actually it really comes down to sort of like how you feel about risk. You know, ultimately, I think you're quantifying how you feel about risk, and that makes sense at the population level because you know we can do it that way. But when it comes down to you as an individual, I think things get very, very hazy.
Well, there's a couple things there. One of the things that happens frequently with math and most people's psychologies is that they get false precision. It's like, really? 84, 88? But like, how do you derive that? That's, your area of expertise. The next thing is, what's the actual fitness function? What's the actual game you're doing? Because actually, in fact, in this case, I think the answer is fairly obvious if 84 and 88 are correct, because it's probability of maximum number of quality of life days, right? And chemotherapy is brutal.
Absolutely brutal.
Right. So you kind of go, okay, actually, in fact, the higher probability of quality of life days is not doing it. And so frequently, I think one of the things that people mistake is, what's the game? And then, the last part of it is to kind of think about, okay, exactly as you're mentioning, well, how does this apply to me? Am I a person who is willing to take some risk? And by the way, most people want to imagine they're not taking risk. They don't realize that when they get in a taxi cab and go somewhere, there's a risk. You walk across the street, there is a risk. And they go, well, it's just 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, because otherwise brain goes, zzz.
I'm immortal.
Yes, exactly. And so part of the thing that I think is excellent is to get a little bit more fluid in the application of probabilities. One of the reasons I love the mission you're on. So
you have to decide what you're actually optimizing for. And I think so often people don't.
Yes.
And one of the things I've been thinking about a lot recently is about prisons, right?
Oh.
Like, and if you kind of look at the data, right? I mean, okay, why would you want to send somebody to prison, or why would you want to, right? And it's like, okay, well, you when somebody commits a crime, you need some way to rehabilitate them, right? You also need to kind of actually take them out of the system. You need some deterrent effect, and you need some sort of sense of retribution for the crime. But when you actually look at the data, like on every single one of those, apart from maybe a feeling of retribution, prison is like the worst possible answer. It's like, what if you want to reduce crime, like, is that the game that you're playing? Or I don't know. This sounds like I'm being very left wing, and I'm not one of the people who sort of cancel prisons or anything. Oh, I don't know, libertarian. Well, it sort of goes round in circles once you get that far around, left and right. But I think about this a lot. I do think that actually people kind of go through a system without ever stopping to think about what the question is, what the game is, exactly as you describe. And then in terms of how do you think about maths, how do you kind of translate it? So going back to that example about cancer, one of the things that I found really noticeable is when you're diagnosed with cancer, you have somebody who will take you into a room away from the doctor, and they will sit with you as long as you want, and they will go through the procedure. They will answer every question that you have. And I did sort of wonder whether, I mean, they're essentially a translator between you and the medical profession, right? And I do sort of wonder that when it comes to questions of risk, because human brains do this black and white thinking, I do sort of wonder whether, I don't think when you're diagnosed with cancer, it's the time to have a statistics lesson, right? I don't think it didn't work before, it's not going to work then, right?
Sure.
And I also don't think that we're doing sort of, I don't think we're getting informed consent from people if you just shout numbers at them, right? I don't think that works either. But what I think that you could do is you could have somebody who turns it round the other way, right? So who sits down with you and says to you, okay, what is important to you in your life? What are the things that you value? And how can we design a treatment system that does that as well as possible for you? I spoke once to a intensive care nurse in the States, and she was saying, because of course, when you're in intensive care, there are all sorts of situations where these probabilities arise, right? Like you can, resuscitate somebody, but the chance of this repercussion is really high, or whatever it might be. This procedure has these consequences. And she said that what she'd started doing with families, rather than saying, this has this percent, this percent, this percent, this percent, she instead says to them, okay, this is what we're thinking. What percentage chance of it working would you be willing to tolerate? So it's the other way around, right? It's not you're taking a number and trying to attach a feeling to it. It's the opposite. You're taking a feeling and trying to attach a number to it. And that, I think, is a much, much better way to try and do things. Noticing how you feel and interpreting it mathematically rather than trying to put the numbers on how you feel. That's, I think, so actually with my kids, I mean, I'm quite bad at doing math homework with them, I've got to be honest.
I'm surprised by that, actually.
Oh God, like that. It's just, I mean, even for me, right? I think it is just running through mental arithmetic is like, it's demoralizing for everybody, right? Yes. But what I do with them is I try and show them things of how to think in a mathematical way. So for instance, if we're walking to town, I'll ask them to come up with a route that minimizes the number of crossings of roads that we do. Or, if I've got, there've been situations where I've had like lots of different jars, if I'm making something and been like, okay, which jar do you think will go with which, they're very young, by the way, it's not like 15-year-olds. But like which jar will go with this lid, or, and I think it's about like seeing the world in a way where you are kind of systematizing and critically thinking about things and noticing that you're doing it rather than necessarily just trying to put numbers on everything.
I mean, I have so many threads I want to pick up here. In addition to the fact that I want all of my children to be mathematicians, and so I'll take advice offline. Your point about sort of pre-deciding, especially before the emotion takes over, I think is so critical. And I think most parents go through that during childbirth. You're faced with all these decisions. Should you get this test? Should you do this? And, my husband and I would say like, well, will we make a different decision based on the information? If we get an information of 60% chance of this or 20%, will it change our mind? Well, then why do we need to know?
Exactly.
Or what is the threshold? So you're not sort of emotional, sort of doing all those things. One of the things you've talked a lot about is that perhaps because, again, of this sort of innumeracy or people's non-facility with math, that they tend to trust the outputs of math blindly, or perhaps of LLMs or computers. And so one of the things I'm excited about with AI is that, it's hard to fix, like wave a wand and fix racism.
Yeah.
But maybe we could wave a wand and make an LLM not racist. It's hard to sort of fix system-wide things, but if we can, sort of change a code, if we could reinforce, if we could do all these things. And you've talked about how, with AI, there could be increased bias because people are just accepting the outcomes. But there's also ways to reduce bias with AI. So how do you think about that, both the opportunities and then also the negatives potentially that come from people just accepting the outputs?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a really interesting paper that came out a couple of years ago, and it was called Women Also Snowboard, sorry, which I just really, as a title, I thought it was great. Anyway, it was looking at image recognition and where you can't tell the gender of people. But what was really interesting was that it demonstrated how, these are not like stable equilibria, right? So if you have a bias in the initial data set, which is where the original bias came from in the labeling, where people were seeing pictures of snowboarders and assuming they were men rather than women. But it can be exacerbated once it goes through the algorithms. And so I think that that's something that, exactly as you say, you have to be extremely cautious about and make sure you're putting in the correct safety procedures to minimize and mitigate against that. But I think that for me, I think that the crucial point about this is sort of the one that you made, right? That you cannot wave a wand and fix sort of systemic issues or societal problems. And so then I think that the question changes. I think this is something that it doesn't have a finish line, right? It's not like, oh, well done, you did fairness, right? Like, oh, unbiased, congratulations, right? Like when I was writing a book a few years ago, and I once spent like a week trying to research and look for any system in the world that has ever been perfectly fair. And it doesn't exist, right? There's nothing. Forget about algorithms completely for a second. And so then I think if you say this is not something that has a finish line, and instead you accept that there will always be bias in your system, and therefore commit to continually hunting for it and repairing it and deliberately putting in opportunities for appeal, right? I think that's kind of one of the to appeal a decision of an algorithm. I think that's the way that you have to approach this.
By the way, it's interesting because your comment just made me think about there are ways to make perfectly fair systems, but they will be very unjust systems.
Yeah, that's
right.
Yeah, you're
Because
right.
you could go 0% all the time, 100% all the time, or 50-50 random, and it'll be fair. It'll apply to everybody.
Yeah, you're
but
right.
oh my God, would it be an unjust system?
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
So the pursuit of justice and fairness in terms of the
together.
fiction, yes, that's the
Absolutely,
challenge.
the sweet spot.
Yes.
I totally agree. Yeah.
So what do you? How has this AI revolution made you think about education? Because one of the things you do at Cambridge, obviously, is trying to make, kind of math education widespread, impactful, et cetera. But let's generalize a little bit to education generally. And obviously, there's been a lot of turmoil within the academy when it comes to ChatGPT and everything else. What are your thoughts on it, and how should universities be thinking about AI generally? How are you thinking about it? What do you think its role in learning, teaching?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, obviously, it's been a massive disruption. So thanks, tech guys.
Yes, we try.
But I'm really optimistic. I feel really optimistic about it. And I think part of my optimism actually comes back to the point that you made about the game earlier, right? Because the thing is the real disruption has happened in the way that we assess students' performance. But if you kind of rewind what the question is about the assessment in the first place, it's like the real question that we want to answer is, how do we know whether our students are getting a good education, whether they're understanding the concepts and are ready for the next step that they go on to? And you can't ever really answer that question, right? You sort of have to kind of get a glance at it. It's you have to use a metric in order to get there. And the metric, always falls short of precisely the thing. You can't use numbers to like perfectly capture these things. And so I think that I'm fine. I'm fine with the fact that written essays have to be considered in a different way. I'm fine with the fact that we have to move more towards oral examinations, sort of move away from like pre-written courseworks, change the types of questions that we're asking. I'm genuinely fine with that. I'm okay with it. But where I'm really excited about it is that we've known for a really long time that different people learn in different ways. And that, but it's really hard to do that when you're one person standing at the front of a room full of people. And I think just even from my own experience, right, like using AI for research, it's just like, it's like on steroids, right? Like it's incredible how much faster you can accumulate and assimilate and like critically think about knowledge. And so I think that the stuff we already have actually is making students, I think it's giving them extra tools that they, not just tools to use, but sort of giving them extra learning, right? Like I think they're learning faster and better than they were before. But I also think that the AI tutors that I'm looking forward to, which will be adapted for individual people's learning styles, and can reinforce, like can really clearly identify gaps in their knowledge and then, appropriately construct questions to reinforce those. I really think there's a lot of really good stuff that's going to be coming.
I agree.
I mean, it's funny. I was thinking about the switch from written to oral examinations. And I used to teach, and my students, no offense, were just horrific writers. And so even if they understood the concepts, like I would always ding them for their writing. But some of them were amazing orators. And so why, all of these things are coming in and we're never going to get it perfect. And maybe AI can help us actually get a more holistic picture of the person we're thinking about.
One thing, just very quickly on that, another thing that I've been thinking about a lot is, I think, historically, every culture, every society has always really valued wisdom, right? And I sort of think of wisdom as an ability to take in a wide range of variables and come up with a very particular response to whatever that might be. And I think that historically, actually, we've sort of been at the exact opposite end of the spectrum, which is like one solution for everybody, like written exams for everybody, oral exams for everybody, whatever it might be. And I think because oral exams, work really well for some students, but I think I certainly find some of my female students particularly like really struggle with them, find really overwhelming. And I think what I'm really looking forward to is I think that we are kind of been through the stage where it's like one size fits everybody. And I think we're moving more towards AI, which is like much more individual.
Staying on the thread of AI, I rewatched your TED Talk last night, which for those of you who haven't seen it, it was all about using math to find love.
Yeah.
And so I'd ask you, in the age of AI, I mean, people are having AI friends, AI girlfriends. They're using AI on dating apps to, give them the best poem to send to someone, whatever it might be. How would you update your TED Talk in the age of AI?
Oh my gosh, it's such a big question. Because I did that TED Talk like over a decade ago. I should also tell you that when I did it, I think I was just engaged or like just about to be married, and I was very excited about the world. And I gave one of these bits of advice about how you can use math to optimize your own dating life. I'm now divorced, everybody. Okay, so basically, don't listen to anything I say.
No, understand its probabilities.
You're absolutely right. And the 37%, there's one bit in there which is like how to, find your perfect partner. It works 37% of the time.
Yes.
And I got so many emails from people, right, who were angry at me saying it didn't work, or like, it didn't work for me. I found love in a different way. And I was like, guys, that means it doesn't work 2/3 of the time. Anyway.
Yes. Roll the dice.
Exactly.
5 or 6, it works.
Exactly. But in terms of updating it for the age of AI, I think that something really interesting has happened actually with dating apps. And I sort of don't want to seem like I'm getting stuck on the same thing, but I think it does again come back to what is the game, right? Yes. Because the thing is that what you actually want, right, as a person, is you want to find somebody. The hard bit about dating is like finding somebody who you can integrate your life with in an effective way, where you have these shared goals, where you support each other, emotionally in terms of your career, all of that stuff. Finding somebody where you can do that with, and the process of doing it, right? Communication ultimately is like the thing that's difficult about relationships. The thing that is not difficult about relationships and has never been difficult about relationships is which of these 2D images of people do you think are better than others, right? That is not what it is, yeah?
Yes.
And somehow or other, like that has become what dating is about. And of course, it's because it's the bit where you can, you can find profit. But I think that actually, I don't know, I think that this is one of those situations where the technology has started changing human behavior. I think that like young people, they're slightly going off dating apps now, I think, in their droves. But I think that just the way that we have relationships has just dramatically changed because of the impact of these apps. So in terms of what I would do with AI, I don't know, maybe I think I might be, it would be around what the question would be. So I think it would probably be something around improving communication between individuals. Yeah?
I mean, my favorite thing about the TED Talk was about increasing your odds. Sort of to your point, understanding the game. The game isn't necessarily to be you're in a competitive space.
Yeah.
And so it's like highlight the thing, like you also want to whittle down. You also only want to match with the people who are going to like you in the end. You know what I mean? Like there's no point, like you want to make sure that you're increasing your odds. And I loved it was the Portia de Rossi versus Sarah Jessica Parker, not to pit the two against each other. But right, if you have something unique, it's like put it out there because that's what you'll get back in return. And I think, again, AI can just help people understand that communication, relationship. You can talk to your AI to like figure out what you're supposed to say. You can get advice. Like there are positive things that it can help you to do. But to your point, maybe looking at 2 static images and deciding which is most attractive is not going to get you to your future husband or wife.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that whole point about like, you think that you're appealing to the masses. You're not. You're not appealing to the masses. You should pick whatever makes you unique and just go with that. Yeah.
So before we get to your new BBC series, which I have several questions about, I'm curious if you have a heuristic about how people can learn a good mapping between an emotional state and like a number or a percentage. Because I agree with you entirely that it's kind of, because it also is like, what's your aim? What's the game? Plays into the emotional state. But it's like, you suggested it's like, well, starting out with like, well, what percentage would be acceptable to you as a way of doing it? But of course, that requires practice and a reasonable mapping function. Have you had any insights about how people can learn that mapping function better?
I think practice is the key.
Okay.
I really think practice is the key. So for a while there, the super forecaster stuff, the
Yes.
Phil Tetlock thing, where you look at different future events and then you put down a probability, and then you have to check back. The important thing is you have to check back and recalibrate your percentages that you're giving it based on what actually happens. And so I think that it's you have to continually reassess it. The other thing, actually, the one that I use most of the time, because the precise situation where you're like, what's the number I would be happy with and what's the number that it is, I don't think those come up that often. I think the one that I use more often is regret minimization. So where I imagine being in the future and looking back and then choose the path which I would regret the least. That's the one I use almost all the time.
No, it's again, depending on the game, a very useful tool.
Absolutely.
So let me move to your new to come out BBC series, and start with a confession, which is I find it very difficult to watch Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Because when I watch Black Mirror, I'm like, oh, I know how to fix that. Like, I know how to not make that be the dystopia. Like, it's not inevitable. Sure, if you're dumb and build it this way and your society somehow orients around making it dystopic, it can be terrible. But like, it's kind of like it's like watching, like, where you could stop the trolley running over the baby, and you just have a button and you're just watching. It's like, oh no, I know how to train it. So it was described as like real life Black Mirror.
Yeah.
So
that was my BBC commissioner. He used that phrase. Yeah.
Yes. So I had a bit of an aversion response, which
Dad.
surprised me because, I see you as an optimist about how we create the
Yeah, I
future.
think I
So
am.
what is this future coming, and what is this series?
Okay, so I agree with you about that there's dumb ways to design things, but I think the slight problem is
Sometimes
there are
they are.
dumb people designing stuff, right? And I think that there are some really astonishing stories of things that have already happened and are continuing to happen. I saw I went to go meet this company in California. Like not very long ago, where so now it's new cars have to be built with an internal facing camera, right? And part of that is technology to check when the driver is falling asleep at the wheel in order to alert them, right? Which I think is really positive thing, will reduce deaths on the roads. But what you can also do, if you are a dumb designer, is you can use an AI to determine the emotional state of the driver, right? Okay. Now, I probably should have put that in air quotes because the actual science behind it is just junk.
Yes.
It's based on the idea that you smile when you're happy and you frown when you're sad, right? Which is like, it's just not true at all. And yet, because there's nothing stopping people selling this stuff, there are companies who will take those feeds and then, send it out to insurers that you're a grumpy driver or whatever it might be, and it's like, okay, well, and their sort of thinking is that it will change your insurance policy, but maybe also if there's like, a particular emotional state that you're in, then your car wouldn't work. Like this is sort of their future vision, right? So, well, what if somebody, I don't know, just ran over my dog? I would be very angry, but I need to get the dog to the vet. Like what's the, you need the kind of context, you need the wisdom.
Yes.
And so there are these stories, right? There are these stories where people have done things that don't make sense, that need correction. And I think part of that correction is also sort of shining a bit of a light on them. I think it's about having those conversations in the public space. but I also I also agree with you that I am ultimately an optimist. I think it's possible I'm using optimism as a coping strategy sometimes, but I do think that there are.
By the way, it's a healthy coping strategy. That makes it good.
But I think you're right that there are really, really clear ways to mitigate against some of the worst potential harms of this stuff. And so I think it's about both of those together. But if you're telling a story, you also have to sort of draw people in, right?
100%. And by the way, I agree with everything you've said. And yes, there is, sadly, sometimes for stupidity reasons, sometimes for commercial reasons, misfires in this. And outside commentary and revelation is an important part of this. But I think like one of the things that I'm curious about if you're going to do in the story, because if you go, well, it's a probability curve. And I'll give you an example of something that I, encountered last year, which is there's a lawsuit against Character AI for a child, tragedy, obviously, who was having interaction with a chatbot and committed suicide. And so there's a lawsuit. Now, as far as I can tell from a perusal of the chat manuscript, the chatbot wasn't doing any of the obvious things that you would trigger a lawsuit, which is you should consider committing suicide or that kind of thing. It was kind of it had some irregularities in the conversation, but nothing that was like persuasive, manipulative, etc. But the problem that I saw, and this is part of how we as human beings take narration and make bad judgments because of it, is if you asked me to guess right now, would chatbots as they've existed and been deployed increase or decrease suicides across the entire population? My guess is it'd be decrease, right? Because there's a sympathetic ear to talk to you at 2 a.m. I know the vast majority of these chatbots are trained in a way of going, oh, are you unhappy? Well, let's talk to you, but let's try to help you get back to a thing. And so when you say, okay, we have this narrative where this bad thing happened, you also have to be like, where does it fit within the probability curve? And given you and the intelligence around math, I presume that's also part of this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Because it's nuance, right?
Yes.
I totally agree. But then I also think that actually, in that example, I would probably take the conversation to a higher level, right? Which is about the ways in which we anthropomorphize these chatbots, right? And consider them to be human, where people are forming kind of genuine emotional connections and genuine bonds almost with these chatbots. And I think that is not. I don't think that's like. I don't think that has to be that way. And I think that there are questions about, like, we should be having public conversations about how much we want our chatbots or whatever it might be to sort of act as though they're human, bearing in mind that humans have this real habit of, exactly as you say, putting a story on something. But this reminds me, I think, of what was happening, in the earlier days of driverless cars, when, yes, driverless cars were reducing the total number of deaths on the roads, but equally there were deaths due to driverless cars going wrong. And I think that for me, the conversation really focused on those two instances, right, rather than thinking of the top question. Because I think that the top level question with driving, right, is like, okay, well, humans are going to be in cars, right? So what is it that humans are not very good at? Well, we're not very good at paying attention. Like, we're not very good at acting well under pressure. And we're not very good at being aware of our surroundings, right? Those are the things.
And self-assessment.
And self-assessment, absolutely right. And so I think that when the design of those systems in those earlier days was, okay, well, we'll just get the machine to drive the car and then the human will step in. And it's like, well, hang on a second, humans aren't very good at being aware of their surroundings. They're not very good at performing under pressure, and then they're not very good at paying attention. So you're expecting the human to kind of step in at the moment when their attention is elsewhere and save us. It's the worst thing that they do, right? It just doesn't work. And then I think that there was like a reframing of it, which is like, okay, well, hang on a second then. If we start with what the human can't do, pay attention, whatever, keep the human in the driving seat and then have the machine fill in the gaps of the stuff that the human can't do. So the car is the thing that steps in when there's a problem, right? Like, the car is the collision avoidance systems that you've had. Well, that's just kind of a much better pairing, right, of the two together. And I think that, having had that now for a number of years, the technology has developed where you can go back to the other system. And I sort of wonder what the equivalent is for chatbots. Don't have an answer for this, by the way, but given that humans have this habit of like imposing personalities and characters on things that are inanimate objects, how do we create these systems in order to mitigate against the worst risks that can happen when they do?
No, I think that's really important. I also think there's all these second order effects. Like I was reading about the decision not to require child car seats on planes. Because actually, if you have a 6-month-old, if they are in a car seat on a plane, they are safer. Mostly nothing will happen, but it's, twice as likely not to have a neck injury or whatever. But if they required car seats on planes, parents would just drive. And you know what's dangerous? Driving. So it's like, oh, actually, we can't just look narrowly at this math statistic that is happening on planes. We have to say, oh, bigger picture, let's look at parental travel and how do we keep our children safe. But I think there's a natural tension, sort of what Reed was saying, between storytelling and statistics or storytelling and facts. Like you see like every day on Twitter, someone saying like, oh, silly me, I thought facts and statistics would change someone's mind.
Yeah.
But we all know it doesn't. And so in your job, in your professorship as sort of trying to explicate the world through math, trying to make people, more, make it more intelligible, how do you see that disconnect between stories and statistics? Because people's brains, parse them so differently.
Oh my gosh, this is such a good question. And it's so hard. So I did this program during COVID. Actually, I realize this is going out publicly, so I have to be quite careful about what I say because I'm still getting emails about it. But essentially, the idea was that we would take 7 anti-vaxxers, and for a week, we would I would be with them basically for a week, and we would have all sorts of conversations. And then over the course of the week, we would see if anybody changed their minds. Now, the thing about this program, I didn't like the cut that went out. Right, I thought there were some problems with it. And I think that the issue was that, exactly as you say, right, we know that statistics doesn't change people's minds. You cannot just throw statistics, numbers at people and then be like, oh, of course, like that's obviously I was right. It doesn't work, right? It's called the public deficit model of, the deficit model of public communication, which is like, if only people knew what we knew, they would see the world in the way that we do. It doesn't work. And what I wanted to do with that program was actually really sit down and understand where these people were coming from. And over the course of the week, I mean, not much made it to air, unfortunately, but which is understandable because the BBC had like a public service role. They couldn't put out, they couldn't be seen to be putting out opinions of anti-vaxxers, right? But I just found it so interesting, and it changed my mind on so many things. For instance, there was one guy who was a nurse. I really got on very well with him. And I think he'd had some issues when he was younger where he had been put on medication against his will. And so he was like, look, I just believe in informed consent, right? And everybody does. And if somebody comes into the hospital and they have, gangrene in their leg or whatever it might be, and they refuse treatment, we have to accept that. And this is a vaccine that doesn't have like a public society, sort of a societal responsibility, because it doesn't, change the probability of transition, certainly not after a couple of weeks. And so it's my decision to make, and this is the stand that I'm making. And you know what? I kind of went a different way with him, but I sort of actually, I respect that. And actually, I agree with him. There was another woman who was pregnant, and she was a black woman from Lambeth, right? Had a black husband. And at the time, there was the vaccination rates in black Londoners particularly was really down. And so there'd been targeted campaigns to try and increase their participation. And she was like, okay, well, for starters, right, I'm pregnant. I'm not going to take on any unnecessary risk, which, within the fullness of time, actually, I also kind of really see that. But she was also like, why all of a sudden, right? Like all of a sudden, the government have something they want to give young black men in Lambeth. Like never in the history of time has the government tried, and now
first time
all of
I've
a
seen
sudden,
you.
come on, right? But
Sure.
she also made this really interesting point, which was about how when you go to vaccine centres, there were people with clipboards and like masks on and aprons, and there's booths that are separated like this. And she was like, honestly, it just feels like you're going into a prison. And it genuinely had not even occurred to me that might be that sort of triggering experience for somebody. And so I think that a lot, it's sort of, I'm kind of giving the opposite answer, right? I think that actually getting people to understand numbers the first bit of it is you have to understand them. I think it's about listening and not listening while thinking of the next thing that you want to say. And I think that it's like, it's only by doing that, I think you can't really change people's minds, right? People have to change their own minds. And I think that the best way that you can do that is to approach a conversation with empathy.
Yeah. And I think to your point, you have to understand what their point of view is. What's the game? What is their reason for not? And then, we've seen so many studies that actually AI and LLMs are the best at combating conspiracy theories or whatever it might be, because they can understand where the person's coming from and then give some nuanced reasoned argument. And so it's not that people's minds are totally closed. It's that everyone has a different reason. And so when you just attack them with your one-size-fits-all response, of course they close down because you didn't know it was about prison or if it was about this or whatever.
Actually, I think the way the LLMs work is less I'm arguing with you,
right,
and more I am asking you questions, because it's the you don't change their mind, they change their mind.
Their own mind.
Exactly.
Yes.
Right.
Do you remember that amazing study where they got people, I think this was in America, they were either Republican or Democrat, and they asked them about their feelings about Obamacare, right? And then they asked them how strongly they felt about it. And then they took them, then they kind of gave them a new sheet, and they were like, oh, do you know how a toilet works? And everyone was like, yes, obviously I know how a toilet works. I was like, okay, how confident are you? And people were like, 10, come on. And then they were like, okay, here's a diagram. I want you to explain to me how a toilet works and label the parts. And I want you to give me a full rundown of where the water goes and exactly what happens in the whole thing. And then suddenly people are like, okay, maybe not. Okay, fine. Like, remember competence. But what they found was that by doing that, then they asked them like how strongly they felt about Obamacare or whatever it might be. And just that act of like questioning themselves also made them question themselves, on more widely on other topics. So you're right. It's like, it's asking people questions, but to find out the answer, not to sort of humiliate them or anything like that, but just to find out the answer. I think that really is genuinely, I think there's something in that.
So one of the things that I think is interesting when it comes to like going back to the probability thinking in AI is that as AI develops, it'll get higher and higher probability of accuracy of information. And I think that one of the things that we're going to need to do is have an assessment of where will most likely be right, where it might be wrong when you want to look at it more. So, for example, there was a research thing, and so the conspiracy thing was one of the ones that was really interesting. But there was a research thing that suggested that AI, GPT by itself, was better than AI plus doctor. But I think the reason is because the doctors hadn't yet learned how to use GPT, right?
Absolutely.
They didn't know where they should go, oh, right, that's different than I think, and they're probably right.
Yeah.
Right. Or, wait, this case is where I actually want to do more investigation. And I think that's part of what we're going to need. Like, part of the reason why, I'm excited about your work and it's good is like thinking about like, okay, when is this likely to be right and when is this likely to be wrong is going to be part of our AI future and evolving. And so I think part of it is we're going to have to learn heuristics. And the heuristics, again, part of the reason I asked the assigning probabilities to motion is like, we're going to have to be learning these updated heuristics about like, as opposed to I just feel, it's like, well, generally speaking, like for example, one of the heuristics I use in AI, if you ask it a general principled thing, like what are the 7 rules of entrepreneurship, that would generally be pretty good. If you said like one of the things that I did, because I had early access to GPT-4, and so I was showing Aria this, and I said, for example, has Reid Hoffman made a knockoff of Settlers of Catan, or if so, what is it? Because I have made, and actually later today I'm interviewing the children of Settlers of Catan for Masters of Scale.
Amazing,
right? Because love the game and that's awesome. And it said, yes, absolutely. I was like, wow, I discovered that. There's almost very little information on and then it said, what Reid has made is a game called Secret Hitler.
Oh,
right. And there is a game called Secret Hitler
is.
that the Cards Against Humanity people have made a version, and it created a Wikipedia answer that was completely fictitious.
Yeah.
And that was when, because I have these evolving set of heuristics, principles. It's like, well, when you ask a specific question, like X about Reid Hoffman, or this, or give me a quotation from Aria or Hannah, I'm always a little bit more suspicious.
Absolutely. It's the edge cases,
Yes.
right?
Well, or specificity.
Yes.
Because it's trying to be helpful to you, and it fundamentally still doesn't recognize that in a lot of these cases, error is extremely expensive.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree.
Right.
One of the things that I think is absolutely amazing about AlphaFold, right, which is, you had Demis on your podcast, is the way that it also gives you a confidence, right?
Yes.
So it doesn't just tell you this is the folding.
Yes.
It also gives you, so then you can see when the model is in its comfortable zone,
Yes.
and when it's struggling. And I think that is, I think that's really, really helpful.
Yes.
Especially when you're talking about situations like doctors assessing data and information.
And I think some of that's going to end up being, like, for example, when we are actually doing confident, I 1000% agree, we like to see from everything confidence. But I think a lot of the actually training and meta prompting will be, like, for example, you can get GD4, even as it is, to be a much better medical thing when you do a meta prompt with how do you do Bayesian reasoning with medicine.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden it goes, right.
Oh, right, yeah.
I'm going to give you a Bayesian answer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then all of a sudden it's much, much better, because it's like, well, there's a 64% chance that this is saying, and there's a 30%, but it's giving you a list in order with probability assessment.
Really?
Yes.
Amazing.
If you do the Bayesian meta prompt the right way, which is like, what I would do.
Yeah. That's so interesting. I mean, I remember seeing there was a paper about chain of thought reasoning, right, and the difference that it makes. And now, of course, the people have started putting chain of thought reasoning into their models. But it's like, it sort of feels like magic. You know what I mean? Like, it does feel like magic. That, but you're right. It's about like just looking again to see, having confidence in the places where it's confident, and kind of going over it again. It's really you're right. I think subconsciously I've been doing a similar heuristic.
Yeah. All right. Shall we do rapid fire?
Let's move on to rapid fire.
All right. Is there a movie, song, or book that fills you with optimism for the future?
I'm going to go for When We Cease to Understand the World, because it's just, so beautiful. But it's like, it really captures how exhilarating it is to be at the brink of new knowledge, I think. It really makes me feel great. Read about 6 times.
And by the way, since we just did the comedic thing, Stephen Fry read that book and reached out to Labatut.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because he also shares all of our passion. It is a great book.
Yeah, it's really amazing. Really amazing. Because they did the Hay Festival together, didn't they?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
That came out from that reach out.
Oh, wow. Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing.
All right, rapid fire number 2. What is a question that you wish people would ask you more often?
People would ask me more often. Do you want another drink? No.
Done.
I'm joking. I don't know. What do people answer for this one?
Wide variety. Perhaps the funnest one was I asked a friend of mine's kid this question, because I sometimes ask this question in different circumstances. And the kid looked at me and said, "Do I want to be here?"
Amazing. I'm sticking with my first answer then. That's right.
Love it.
That's better. All right. So where do you see progress or momentum outside of your industry that inspires you?
Oh, I think the stuff that's happening in biological spaces is really incredible. I think that physics, physics is lucky that it has equations to discover, right? You can look at all of that data of the galaxies, and then you can come up with E equals mc squared. Like, I mean, almost impossibly simple, right? And biology doesn't have that luxury, but I think that we're now at the situation, or almost, where you can take the unimaginable complexities of biology and extract a sort of working model for how it fits together. And I think that is really, really exciting.
Awesome. All right. Can you leave us with a final thought on what you think is possible to achieve in the next 15 years if everything breaks humanity's way?
Yeah.
And what's the first step to get there?
I mean, let's go crazy optimism for a minute here.
Please.
Because I think that actually, the history of humanity has always been a story about scarcity, right? It's been about resources being divided. And I do think that actually, I really do think that there is a way for science to make a gigantic difference for everybody. I think that there are so many different, areas where if science makes a breakthrough, right, like desalination or in nuclear, nuclear energy or whatever it might be, right? There's a number of different areas, good battery design, right? These kind of things where we just need like a little bit of a breakthrough. And I think everything can potentially change. So, that's, I mean, why not reach for the stars, really?
Perhaps literally.
Except for, no, maybe not, wrong choice of phrase. I think let's stick to Earth, actually. Thank you.
Let's make Earth as
Let's
good
make Earth
as
as good as
possible.
possible. Exactly.
Although reach for the stars with nuclear fusion.
Sure. Okay, yes,
Yes.
agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
It's
That's
awesome.
so fun.
It's
Thank you.
Possible is produced by Wonder Media Network. It's hosted by Aria Finger and me, Reid Hoffman. Our showrunner is Sean Young. Possible is produced by Katie Sanders, Edie Allard, Sarah Schleid, Vanessa Handy, Aaliyah Yates, Paloma Moreno Jimenez, and Malia Agudelo. Jenny Kaplan is our executive producer and editor.
Special thanks to Surya Yalamanchili, Saida Sapieva, Thanasi Delos, Ian Alice, Greg Beato, Parth Patel, and Ben Rellis.